Awesome. So, it was about a week ago now that a bill was introduced in the New Hampshire State House calling for at least the consideration of, they're calling an exit. It's actually a secession bill, essentially. And I wanted to talk about it. Now, I don't think that this is going to happen. Nobody does. The people who didn't introduce it are not thinking that this is going to directly lead to secession in New Hampshire, wonderful as that might be at this point. But it is still a significant development towards that eventual, I would say, goal at this point, pretty much. As long as the federal government is on the trajectory that it's on, and there's no plausible way that seems likely to change it, I do think it makes more sense to think in terms of leaving. And if you don't think your state can leave, maybe think about leaving yourself. So this is really important. I'll put a couple links in the description. In fact, let me do that right now. So this is an article from Free Keen. Put that in the box, and it won't let me because I'm not signed in. All right, let's go here. Here we go. Link in the description. And a couple other things. State Constitution, which we'll talk about in a second. And 80 reasons to leave. Also useful info. It's happening. Hey, Bitcoin motorist. I think, I don't think that this is going to make it happen right away. But it's definitely a step in the right direction. And I think that the Free State Project is positioning itself in such a way that we could be surprised how quickly this does happen. Again, I'm not predicting that it happen anytime in the immediate future, but we just don't know. Basically, this bill, what it does. So it's already submitted. So this is a bill, and other states, Texas, a few others have had stuff that legislatures have talked about, but they never got to be voted on. This will be voted on. It has to get 2/3 in both houses. It does not need the governor's signature because a 2/3 requirement makes it. It needs 60% of both houses of the state house and the Senate house. No gubernatorial signature is necessary, nor would it be forthcoming with the current governor. And then it automatically goes on the 2022 ballot. And if 2/3 of the voters vote for it, it becomes immediately law. That's it. Now, 60% of both houses is a tall order, not impossible. 25% of the lower house are free staters, and some of the ones who are not free staters might still vote for it. I don't know if every free stater will vote for this at this point, but there's a massive overrepresentation of free staters in the state house, and that seems only likely to grow. It was interesting. A lot of people have said, and I've had comments made this, and they stung in the sense that they were true. It's like, well, the Free State Project is supposed to pledge 20,000 people to move. The trigger to the move, I think, was triggered in 2016, which means everybody who signed it had pledged that they would move within 5 years. Now, indeed, many of those people already moved. Some of those people have maybe died. And probably a few of those people have reneged on the, officially reneged. However, not all of those 20,000 people who signed it have moved. And it is now, I don't know if it's 5 years today. It may already have passed. If it was 2016, it's now 2020. It's 2021. So 5 years has gone by, and a lot of people have said, well, you didn't get the 20,000 people. But people didn't stop coming either. People have continued to come. And most estimates I've read are somewhere around 5,000. So 5,000 is a lot of people, but how much effect can that have? Well, in a state such as New Hampshire, And let's just say that a lot of consideration was given strategically to potential states. And they chose, I think, very wisely. Not that there aren't other candidates that are good. Wyoming stands out. Vermont stands out. Maine's not bad. Alaska's not bad. But the access of lay people to the legislature, to government, is really unprecedented in New Hampshire. And so we have 25% of the state house, of the lower house. I don't know what it is in the Senate. There are senators. I don't know how many. So there's that. The other thing is that I think with most political parties, if you look at like the Republican Party in other states, the loyalty there is to party, right? You have all these Republicans who are elected, and maybe their constituents are really conservative or really libertarian or whatever the local culture is, and they'll talk that way. But their advancement is dependent on the national party, higher ups in the party organization. And so when push comes to shove, they're not going to really consistently back their constituents or any political philosophy, however much they may actually believe or not believe. And I think, the Republicans, most of them don't believe it to any degree. There are some who most certainly do, but then they have this powerful incentive to acquiesce to their party structure, right? But in New Hampshire, you have a couple different things. A, because the legislature is so huge relative to the population, it's huge in absolute terms. It's the biggest legislature of any state, but it's one of the smallest states in population. So many of the elections are I think each representative represents something like 7,000 people. And if you look at the tax base, that's just not very much. And so the incentive for lobbying is limited. It's not zero, but when you say a small state, if you have some kind of lobbyist who's looking to make $1 million from some kind of subsidy, how that spreads out among 450 legislatures plus whoever else you have to bribe, it spreads out pretty thin. Whereas in a big state like Texas, there's billions of dollars to be had, right? And most of the other states, there's billions of dollars to be had, and many fewer legislatures. So again, it doesn't make it impossible, but it makes the incentives weaker. The other thing is because there is these thousands of free staters here, and also it should be pointed out, thousands of non-free staters who are free stater leaning, who are very libertarian, who this is the live free or die state. There are a lot of natives, so-called, who are as radical or nearly as radical, or in some cases more radical than free staters. Sometimes when you go to PorcFest, you'll meet some of these people. And I remember one guy was just like, hey, I love New Hampshire. The free state loves New Hampshire. I love the free state. It's that simple. You guys are choosing to move here. You're allies in causes that we love. And if it wasn't for the free staters, New Hampshire would be like every other New England state, like any other state. But this small but very active and very energized and very, very radical element is really tipping the scales. It's not to say that it's overwhelming. When I say tip the scales, I don't mean one side has 1 million tons and the other side has an ounce, but I mean if there's a 1 or 2% difference, it is going to tip the scales, and that's what we're talking about. So again, I don't think this is going to pass, but these legislators are socially networking with other free staters. So like the Speaker of the House is a guy who I've been seeing at PorcFest for a decade, right? And I'm not personally friends with him, but he's well connected within the community, and he was going way before he was elected, right? So everybody knows everybody else, and that is where the loyalty is going to fall. They're not interested in careers in Washington. Free staters are not running for Senate or for national office. They don't care about those. Those aren't part of the plan. People are putting in roots here. The goal is here. And so they're coming here and they're connecting here. And there's so many interlocking social organizations of the free state. And I'll be honest, I'm not that hooked into them. Yes, I go to PorcFest. Yes, I have friends who are in the free state. My roommates for many years, my landlord, like there are many free staters that I have close connections with, but I'm not going. They have dinners, they have clubs, they have homeschooling, they have gun organizations, they have hiking organizations, they have recreational organizations, educational organizations, economic organizations, investing organizations, right? There's a lot. And the people who are in the state house are intimately involved. There's very, very active and stringent political organizations. So there's the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, which is basically, I mean, they played it smart. We can say what we want about the Libertarian Party and all that, but it seems like if you can get elected to office and pass legislation by just calling yourself a Republican or a Democrat, and there are free staters who do that as well, then do that if you can, and that's what has happened. And then they basically have taken over the Republican Party, and that is the view of establishment Republicans who don't like it. That's the view of the left-wingers who hate it. That's another measure of the success here, is that the left wing in this state absolutely hates the free state, absolutely hates it, wishes they could kick all of us out, wishes they could stop it, and there's nothing they can really do. And so if you look around the Antifa activism, BLM activism that's kind of spread across the whole country, and here you have basically the antithesis of that, which predates it and is more principled and I would say even more active, right? We actually moved, we're actually active, we're not just like kids who have issues that we're working out, in violent rallies, and that more than counteracts the left-wing activism here. So there's a constituency, there's a population, right? There's hardcore thousands of people, and more are coming all the time, and stuff like this just brings more. And so if this is, let's say they never get 20,000 people, which at their current ratios, if they got 20,000 people, that would suggest, and I'm not saying that this is true, I don't think there's a linear relationship here, but if there was, that would mean 100% of the legislature would be free stater. But let's say that they only get double, 10,000. Okay, that would be 50% if it holds linearly true, which I don't think that it does. But the fact that it doesn't hold linearly true doesn't mean that it isn't maybe even more than you might think, right? And they could start really getting their act together and saying, we need 200 people to move here, we need 500 people to move here, and I think if they even spread the numbers that they had out now, like really strategically, they could probably win double the seats. Now, are they going to have the ability to do that? No, because we're libertarians, so we're not necessarily going to follow orders in such a regimented way. But we don't need that kind of regimentation when we have enough people in the right state. So the other thing to point out when they were looking for states, not only that it's easy to get elected, not only that it is the live free or die state, and it has that, there's other things too. It has a port, it has a coastline, it has an international border. So it's not like some of these other states like Wyoming, and I love Wyoming. It's a great state, but it is completely landlocked. And if Wyoming were to ever become independent, it would not be independent because it would be heavily, heavily dependent on the United States. They would have to have a corridor through Montana to Alaska to Canada, or a corridor through Idaho and Oregon and Washington to the Pacific, and that is never going to happen. So this man has not taken a statistics class. So I want to look here. So I'd heard this before. I'd never looked it up. If you look up, I put a link in the description. If you look at the state constitution of New Hampshire, there's something called Article 10, right? So, and if you look at the dates on these, yeah. So all these, New Hampshire got a new constitution, it looks like, in June of 1784, because the first, oh goodness, the first 38 amendments are from, the first 38 amendments are from 1784, and then the 39th is from 1966. But if we go back to Article 10, it's short, so I'm going to read it in its entirety. So this is currently in the New Hampshire Constitution right now, and has been since June 2nd, 1784. And it's in parentheses. right of revolution, government being instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the private interest or annulment of any one man, family, or class of men. Therefore, whenever the ends of government are perverted, and the public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other means of redress are ineffectual, the people may, and of right ought, to reform the old or establish a new government. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive to the good and happiness of mankind. So it's interesting here. So it's short, and you look at all these qualifiers, right? It's like, well, if you want to do this, there's a couple things you got to meet. There's a couple criteria, for the common benefit, for protection, for security of the whole community, and not for the private interest or the emolument of men, of any one man, family, or class of men. Therefore, whenever the ends of government are perverted, and the public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other means of redress are ineffectual. Okay, so like those things, those first two are definitely have already, they were met probably in 1789. The last one is debatable, but all these others, very, very clear. So it's right there. And it's interesting too, if you look back to the linear relationship. Yeah, but of course there isn't. There looks like there's a linear relationship, but I'm sure that there's not, because humans are not statistics. But what was I going to say? Thanks for distracting me, Bitcoin motorist. Oh, okay, yeah. So when the Civil War happened, I was actually read this in U.S. Grant's biography rather. That when the state started seceding, Grant thought, and he was not alone in this. A lot of people thought this, that the original 13 colonies had every right to secede, and the legal argument here is actually pretty strong, because when the Revolutionary War ended, there wasn't a federal government during the Revolutionary War. There were the Articles of Confederation, and that was basically not a central government at all. It was 13 individual governments, the 13 colonies, which include New Hampshire. New Hampshire was the most northern of the two, unless you include Maine, which Maine was part of Mass up until 1820. When the Treaty of Paris was signed, ending the war, there were 13 separate peace treaties signed. Okay, the United Kingdom did not sign a peace treaty with, quote, the United States or the federal government. They signed peace treaties with Maine, or not with Maine, but with New Hampshire, with Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Delaware, and Maryland. And I think that's it. Maybe I forgot one, but I think I got them all. So if those colonies join, and so the argument is they joined, they can leave. They put explicitly that this was, when it was debated, and some of them put this in their acceptance of the Constitution, it wasn't perpetual. It's not a perpetual union. It's not like a marriage vow till death do us part. It was not perpetual. It was understood not to be perpetual. And it's actually interesting because in the Civil War, it wasn't really debated. There was a war, and Lincoln made it. He didn't even say secession is always wrong. He basically said the South attacked the North, and this is somehow self-defensive. Now, they did that by quote-unquote attacking Fort Sumter, which is in South Carolina. And how did South Carolina attack the federal government in Charleston Harbor? Good question. That was kind of the nominal reason. They didn't come out and say explicitly that the states didn't have a right to lead. Now, there were arguments that there was some kind of amorphous union that was created somehow, but it's not clear how, and this is very debatable. And after the war, one of the reasons that they did not try people like Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee is because if this had gone to court, it's not clear that they would have lost, that they could have gone to trial and been acquitted, in which case basically the legal system of the conquering federal government would have said the conquering federal government was wrong. The secession is legal. Now, they are probably going to fall back on it's maybe it is legal, maybe it's not, but they attacked us. They attacked the federal garrison on Fort Sumter, which, as it turned out, nobody died in that except for a Confederate horse, very famously. But it's a little bit more complicated. I don't think it's complicated ethically, but like legally, it's a little bit more complicated with the states that were established later. Basically, all the other states, 37 other states, because by and large, they were purchased with the federal treasury. Some exceptions might be like Vermont, because Vermont was not. Vermont basically seceded from New York and or New Hampshire, depending on where they were splitting from. And this was what Grant's arguments was. These other states like Kentucky or Missouri or Iowa, the federal government had bought those states, and so those states weren't truly sovereign. But really, they are technically sovereign. They are sovereign states. That's what the name means. It's the United States. They're separate states and states. And this has just confused American school children forever, because when everyone else in the world says state, they mean the sovereign, right? The sovereign national entity, the state of Russia, the Russian state, the Polish state, the Prussian state, the French state, the Japanese state, right? A state is not a subdivision, a political subdivision. That would be something you would call that a province or a satrap, something like that, not a state. It's super, super weird. Yet that is what they are called. That is what it says in the Constitution. The states are sovereign. And again, anarchist here, I think that's ridiculous as well. But if we're going by the logic, then that's just as well. So the states are sovereign and New Hampshire can leave. And the other thing is, New Hampshire is a net taxpayer. We don't have income taxes here, but we have to pay federal income taxes. And the average person here, I believe it's $25,000. New Hampshire it's basically tied for the highest IQ on average of any state. I think New Hampshire and Mass are within 1/10 of 1 point of each other. And Mass is just probably propped up because they have about 250,000 students there who are pretty smart by and large, at least in terms of IQ. We've got a port. There's going to be issues, I think. Look, I'm not getting ahead of I'm not saying this is going to be a problem in 3 weeks or whatever, but if this does happen, Maine is going to become an enclave. And if this really did happen, would not be surprised if Maine also left. The big problem, as I see it, is there's a big Navy base in Portsmouth. And it's the second oldest Navy base in the country. I think the oldest is in Annapolis. And they're probably not going to like that. Maybe we can get some kind of easement or whatever. But yeah, New Hampshire has a port. New Hampshire has a coast. New Hampshire has a border with Canada. New Hampshire has a very high GDP. And it's a net taxpayer. So we don't need the federal government at all. The federal government is a burden on us. And there's another article. Yeah, so the Liberty Block article talks about how the federal government has made everything about the state worse. The federal government funds the governor to do the things he does that are wrong. They fund the local police for everything they do that's wrong. So, this is to get that on the public, to have it something that's discussed, something that will be voted on. What this means too is that there will be a vote on this, and it's not going to win, but it's going to be in the papers, and people are going to talk about it in the papers, right? It's going to become a topic that more and more people are going to talk about. So, Also, since I have a few more people watching now, I would like to invite everyone, if you're not already over, to come over to Odysee, where my other channel is. Everything's getting mirrored there, and there's content on the Odysee that I'm putting there that I'm not putting on YouTube, because stuff on YouTube will get taken down. So putting a link right now to the Odysee. Come on, paste. So I just had an interesting discussion on there somewhat pertinent to this. Somebody reached out to me on Odysee and they wanted to debate slavery, and he and I did not see eye to eye on a lot of on all that many issues, although there was some curious overlaps here and there. But we did a 3-hour debate, or we'll call it a discussion, a 3-hour discussion on slavery. And it was very refreshing to be on a platform where you can have an honest debate about a topic. We don't have to agree with each other. We don't have to know anything else about each other, but we were able to have what was a very civil discussion. Say what you will about his opinion or mine. And that's the kind of stuff that it was so nice to go onto Odysee and see that and to be able to do that. So if you guys haven't gone over to Odysee, man, it's free. It doesn't cost anything. I'm not selling anything. Go check out the Odysee. There's a link there to that video if you want to see it. If you want to hear, I thought it was a pretty interesting discussion about slavery, about two people who are fairly knowledgeable but disagree very fundamentally on the topic. So go ahead and check that out if you'd like. And all my videos are on Odysee. Everything I put on YouTube will go on Odysee automatically, but there is going to be content that I put only on Odysee just because it's too hot for YouTube, right? And there's going to be more of that content coming up just because there's a lot of things that, I haven't hesitated too much, I'll be honest, but like a lot of stuff has been taken down, right? There's certain topics that just automatically gets taken down on YouTube. So, I want to support a platform that's more free speech friendly, and that's Odysee. YouTube is wonderful in so many ways, and I don't want to knock it completely, but their ideology is, it's not mine. It's very different from mine, and it's not a good one for an open discussion or open debate. So, we have the wonderful opportunity here with these entrepreneurs who put all this stuff together and make it free. It didn't cost me anything other than about an hour of time to mirror my entire channel, and almost my entire catalog is up there. There were limits to how many could upload. So I think I have like 600 videos, and they uploaded like 500 of them or something. So not everything, but a great deal. And that's wonderful. It's on the blockchain. And it also looks like it gets monetized in a more readily accessible way than YouTube ever did. Not that it's an income, but there it is. So yeah, everyone go and check that out. Not to say that the secession of New Hampshire, the New Hampshirexit, is not more important, but it is kind of related because we were talking about slavery there. So, yeah, I think that I don't see this as like the domino that's going to lead to it happening, in a year and a couple of years. But everyone knows that the centripetal forces in the United States are getting stronger and stronger. My view is that although there's a lot of factors involved, the ability of the government both to physically coerce and then also to ideologically control a population is to an important degree a function of what is technologically possible. Okay, so if you have a society, a very good example, if we want to go way back, if you have a society that is without money, as a barter society that exists in a situation where there is no money, then the ability of the state to tax in that situation is very limited. It's not zero, but the taxes are not going to be paid in a universal medium of exchange. They're going to be paid in kind. You're going to pay your taxes with some proportion of your crop. And as it turns out, some crops are very good for that, such as wheat and rice. And some crops are very bad for that. If they're any kind of root vegetable like potatoes or sweet potatoes or gourds that grow underground, and it's very difficult to look at a potato field and know how many potatoes are there and therefore what 10% of that would be, right? And then you get a money economy, and now you can shift what's possible. Not that, money is a two-edged sword. It helps people. Money is a wonderful innovation, but it's an innovation that has helped the state. You look at something like the printing press, very similar, right? Where it can help, it can hurt. And I think what you have here in the United States is for about 100 years, because of the federal government and because of mass media, the corporate media, as Michael Malice says, you had a couple newspapers initially, and then later a couple radio stations and of course the radio stations and television stations later were directly subsidized. The federal government nationalized the airwaves, right? They just said, radio waves and television waves, those are owned by the federal government, and they will give them out in licenses. And then to get those licenses, you have to do what the federal government says, which ultimately means you have to be relatively nice to the federal government. You can't come out and say that they're evil, horrible, terrible, shouldn't exist, shouldn't have power, should be abolished, should be seceded, all that stuff. No, you'll lose your license. So to be fair and balanced, you have to basically be some degree of a toady. But that created what seemed like a lot of ideological consistency, right? You had this monolithic national culture, the Walter Cronkites and the Peter Jenningses and the William Randolph Hearsts of the 20th century, and that has now started to splinter, and we have such a plethora of different sources now that people are starting to spin apart. People are siloing, which they had done earlier just because of geographic reasons. Now they're doing it again for technological reasons, and I don't think, we don't know for sure, but it seems like the ability to put the lid on it is limited, and maybe in the long run there might be a way, but before that happens, things are going to get much, much worse. We have a country that is starting to literally hate half the other country. They can't look at the same thing. They can look at the same thing and draw two diametrically opposite conclusions on the moral import and the reaction that should follow. So this is going to be a big problem, and whoever the president is, half the country is going to hate their guts. And the thing is, even though there's something about left-wing culture that's kind of metastasized, and there's little cores of left-wing culture all over the country, right? Little cities, colleges, whatever, they're not powerful enough in approximately half the states to control those states, and they don't. So yes, Austin is a very liberal city. Houston's a very liberal city, and I'm sure there's plenty of people in those cities who think and look and hope and wish that they were New Yorkers, right? But they aren't numerous or powerful enough to control Texas or Oklahoma, or we could go on the list. And the result is that there is a lot of power in the opposition, and in fact, it's roughly even-ish. And then the other thing too is that the left has this very anti-United States, and I don't know how do you parse that? Well, if you hate the United States so much, maybe you should hate the federal government more, in which case don't run it or get out of it or whatever. So yeah, and the things with the lockdowns have really started to crystallize a lot of this. People are very upset about them, and rightfully so. It's getting absolutely ridiculous what they're expecting us to believe, how far the goalposts have moved, and people are getting fed up, right? And what do they do? What do they do for us? Taxes, regulations, and then they're snotty, right? They just talk down to us. Our patience is tried thin, as they say. So this is just going to be more and more in the conversation. New Hampshire's leading the way on this. More and more people are moving for that reason. I had people message me because of this saying, I'm trying to move right now. So people talk about as if the Free State Project ended, when actually no, people are still moving here every single day. I just met somebody the other day who moved here, gun owner from New Jersey, hated New Jersey, gone on up here, couldn't be happier. People like him and her, and they're moving every day, probably, if not every day, every week. And in a state this small, that makes a difference, especially if you're going to get integrated into the politics, if you're going to get integrated into the culture. Yeah, this is exciting. If they ever actually got 20,000, I think that would be endgame. But it seems like that will not be necessary to get that many, but the more the merrier. And I've got friends who are trying. What did the Romans ever do for it? That is a hilarious skit from the life of Brian, if that's what you're referring to. But the skit there, though, I think as hilarious as Monty Python is, what did the Romans ever do? They list those things, but those things were all taxed off of them in the first place. And there's very little evidence that we need the federal government to do anything for us, right? They just burden us with their tyranny. And the things that they subsidize don't need to be subsidized. They shouldn't even be run by the government anyway. And there's always the question of opportunity cost and the unseen, right? If they give you a road, what did they take to build it, right? What is the cost there? It's very easy to think about and conceptualize government subsidies as some gigantic syringe coming in out of space and injecting things, injecting infrastructure, injecting healthcare or education or whatever the case may be. But that's just not true. It's not coming from a spaceship or a dimensional portal. They're taxing that from us, or maybe even worse, inflating the currency. And Cantillon effects just transfer wealth to those who print the money to those who hold the dollars, which is everybody else, especially if you're poor, right? So no, they don't do anything for us. And New Hampshire is a thrifty state, right? The state expenditures are lower than the tax revenues, even though they don't have income tax or sales tax in the state. And you can see in the way that it's built. Sometimes it's annoying, I'll be honest, because when they build roads here, they build them in what is the most cost-effective way. And I have friends. Again, the gay network. I have friends who work in civil engineering and work as civil engineers in New Hampshire, and they say New Hampshire's road system is absolutely built to be the cheapest it can be to get the job done, which means on the downside, sometimes the drive times are longer than you might expect. If I want to go to Keene, and I have friends in Keene, and I have reason to go to Keene on a fairly regular basis, it's 45 miles away, and it does take an hour and a half to drive there. But the upside is I never pay income taxes, and I never pay sales taxes. That's a tiny, tiny, tiny trade. I'm more than happy to make it. And somehow they managed to still plow the roads, which is more than can be fucking said for Massachusetts and Vermont, which for some reason can't plow the roads. Yeah, and I also think if this were ever to happen, you would have two things also happen. The worst parts of the state would probably leave. Okay, the people in New Hampshire that would be anathema for, they would leave. And the people who would love that, they would move in, probably in a tidal wave. So like the Free State Project would only be a trickle in comparison to the number of people who would move here if they seceded. And I already have people talking about trying to, I have a friend in the UK who is trying to buy property here because he assumes it'll only go up in value. And if they ever did secede, it will shoot up in value. Is it expensive to rent here? It depends where you live. It's not that expensive. If you're going to compare it to a huge city, it's not even close. If you're talking about Boston or New York, there's just absolutely no comparison. Obviously, if you want to get a really nice place in Manchester, but I live in Manchester, I pay for a full, like basically I'm renting a floor of a house, right? So I have my own bathroom, my own garage, my own backyard, 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, plenty of space, right? More space than I could ever use. I pay $1,200 a month, right? I get one roommate, $600, and that's actually what I did for years and years and years and years. So like, very affordable. And also there's entire Free Stater networks dedicated to that. There's tons of Free Staters who own property, who want Free Staters to move here. I know multiple Free Staters who are millionaires or close to millionaires who did not have that kind of money when they moved here, but they just got into real estate. Average rent was $1,700 per day. Yeah. So it's not bad at all. There's plenty of jobs. There's plenty of work. There's plenty to do. You got oceans, you got mountains. The big thing people don't like is the winter, but you have winter in half the country anyway. So who fucking cares? Winter, I'm from a place that had winter. So for me, this seems like not a big deal. Look on the bright side. You can ski and snowboard, which by the way, people here love. They ban critical race theory in the schools. They're paying people to take their kids out of public school. I talked about that a little bit earlier. I don't know if I knew the full details. So in the budget, they put a program to pay families $4,000 to take their child out of public school, and with basically no strings attached. They could homeschool them, they could private school them, they could unschool them, whatever they wanted to do. They thought that they were going to they budgeted for 70 families to do that, and 70,000 families inquired. Which is 10% of the child population. We're like, yeah, we're interested. Now, I don't know if they all will, how the state will budget that. Obviously, though, if they cut out $4,000 is much less than they spend per pupil to be in school. So it's a cost-saving measure if they're able to actually cut school funding, which they will if they're not getting federal subsidy. Also, that is, I mean, look, there's still I've been doing a lot of research into schools in New Hampshire, like looking at their budgets, looking at their minutes, the school board minutes. I've literally looked at thousands of pages of school board minutes in the last few months. Um, it is ridiculous, and this is not unique to New Hampshire by any means. Public schools are a complete and total scam. That's just complete and total scam. The school boards are property managers who are throwing around millions of dollars in contracts, even in a small district, throwing around millions of dollars in contracts. And it's ostensibly because there's kids going there and not learning how to do anything. So that's still a problem, but the independents will cut that back, right? Because right now we've got federal regulations, federal subsidy. If New Hampshire left, would you be out of a job in the oil industry? I mean, I kind of already am. I mean, the big question would be, there's two things. I guess there's two really big problems, and maybe I'm missing something. One is the people who have paid into federal systems who probably are not going to receive their benefits, right? If you've been paying into Social Security your whole life, if you're retired and New Hampshire secedes, I kind of imagine the federal government's going to be pissed. And, I don't think they'll go to war and send in the tanks, but they probably aren't going to send you a Social Security check. Not a bad trade if you're able to then not have to pay into Social Security and not have to pay federal income taxes. Easy trade, because you never get a return on investment on that stuff. However, kind of shitty for the people who aren't going to keep working, right? If you're already retired, it's not going to do you a lot of good, or if you can't work especially. If you're retired and can work, it may still be okay. It would not surprise me if someone got 4 or 5 good years without taxes, that they could probably compensate for the 40 years that they had, most of their income siphoned off by a giant tyrannical bureaucracy 800 miles away, but 400 miles away. The other problem would be, what would be the border situation? Would we have a closed border? And my guess is almost certainly not. Like I said, there would be an issue because Maine would become an enclave at that point, because Maine only touches Canada and New Hampshire. It doesn't touch any other state. So if you wanted to drive from Maine to any other part of the United States, you would have to go through New Hampshire. It's not a very big gap. If you go on the highway, that's I-95 that connects Boston to Portland. If you were to go down that, I believe it's 18 miles that you drive through New Hampshire. So they would probably hike up the tolls and just pay the entire budget just based on that. I think if this ever actually happened, though, the situation in Maine would probably change in some way. Maine might leave. It might also just form some kind of New England republic with New Hampshire potentially. Maine has a lot of fucked up hippies and shit, but it also has a lot of very New Hampshire-esque hardy lumberjack people. And a lot of those people are moving to New Hampshire, but yeah. Social Security codes could get a U.S. address and have their checks emailed to the New Hampshire. Yeah, I mean, I would assume that there would just be massive fraud, but it wouldn't apply to everyone. I've been seriously considering moving to New Hampshire. I love Boston, but Massachusetts leftism is becoming insufferable. Well, Adams, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can live in New Hampshire and drive to Boston every single day if you want. In fact, I think it's 15% of the population of New Hampshire commutes to Mass every day for work. Okay, and you can live. I live in Manchester. It's 45 minutes away. I could go to Boston any day that I want and enjoy it, but not have to fucking live there and deal with all that shit all the time. Right? It's worth it for the savings in terms of it's cheaper, it's bigger, there's more here. They don't close the roads here. You can own a gun. You can easily own a gun, no problem. You can open carry, you can conceal carry, and you don't have to pay any. I mean, you're in Massachusetts. Just move here. If you love Boston, that's fine. I can see why people do love it. I like Quincy Market. I like the Freedom Trail. I like all the schools and all the people who go to the schools, if you know what I mean. But you can come visit, man. If you live in Salem, it's 35 minutes away or less. 35 minutes away or less from Salem. Same from Nashua. So you can definitely do that, and you'll be saving money on everything else. You could probably save enough money to still rent a place in Boston. New Hampshire could give up a corridor across the north. You mean like connecting northern Maine to northern Vermont? I think that, well, yeah, because they would not want to give up a corridor that cuts off the coast. There would probably just be an easement. They'd probably just say, yeah, it's fine. So I don't think that's going to happen, though. It's crazy looking into this. There's giant tracts of land, huge tracts of land in northern New Hampshire where the population is zero, and they're privately owned. Dartmouth owns, it's something like 24,000 acres in one rectangle in Coos County, and there's 3 or 4 others. I forget what they call them. They have a name, but they're basically land grants. The so and so grant, the so and so strip, the so and so section that are massive. And if you want to live in a nice urban setting, man, you've got Manchester, you got Portsmouth, you got Dover and Durham. There's Keene if you want that college town, or Hanover if you want a college town feel. You've got Hanover, we've got Keene, you've got Durham, Salem, Nashua, and then if you want something that's more rustic, you absolutely can Granite State it and go up in Grafton or Berlin. I have friends who live in Berlin and they love it. Berlin's beautiful and it's fucking cheap, or it was. If you got in a couple years ago, you would have been set. But you can still find places if you're willing to look. It's not that bad. This is one of the places people have been moving. People have been fleeing New York City and Boston. This is one of the places they go. It's not the only place. My contacts in northern Michigan tell me that northern Michigan is lit up like crazy. People from Chicago and Detroit are just trying to get out of Dodge. But a lot of them are coming here. A lot of them are coming here too. It's just a great proximity, man. You've got the ocean, you've got the lakes, you've got the rivers, you got the mountains, you got the cities. There's a tech corridor. Like there's a lot of tech entrepreneurship. It's the capital of crypto in the entire world. That's something I didn't even mention. I know Bitcoin motorists, you could probably speak to that. Isn't it something like more than 50% of all of the Bitcoin transactions in the United States happen in New Hampshire? Something like that. Yeah, hippies are the worst. So we don't have too many hippies here. There's a few in Keene. Look, it's a small state, but we don't believe in autarky, so who fucking cares? The idea that you need to have a large enough state where you can grow your own sugar and nutmeg is just silly. You don't. That's what trade is for, and you specialize in what you're best at, and that's how you end up being the wealthiest. And yeah. How serious was Sununu's lockdown? So it wasn't that serious, but it was still bad. If you looked at the decree that he gave, it was almost verbatim the same as the decree given in Massachusetts, which was fairly stringent. And he was sued for this. I don't know what the status of that lawsuit is, but he was sued for this. Many traditional Republicans were furious at him. And the other thing is the enforcement seemed to have been zero or close to zero. So, for instance, they were mandating that, certain types of businesses be closed. Many of those businesses never did and never faced any penalties of any kind. So I think what I was told from insiders, I know people who know Sununu. I don't know how well they know him, but they know him. They've got his cell phone number, who told me that they were worried that if New Hampshire just said everything's fine, there's no lockdown, that literally several million people a day would visit New Hampshire from Mass especially, but also Vermont and Maine, coming here to go to the businesses that are closed. And that happened anyway. I was getting guys on Grindr who were coming up to Manchester to get haircuts because you couldn't get a haircut in Mass, but you could get a haircut in New Hampshire. You could go to a restaurant in New Hampshire. You could, right. It never was as bad, and it opened up a lot sooner. The enforcement was basically zil. The other thing, the new budget that was passed and is now law, which on top of cutting taxes and spending, also limited the governor's power a lot. So if he declares an emergency again, the emergency automatically ends, I think, in 20 or 30 days, unless both houses positively pass it. So it's not a case where the legislatures have to end it. The emergency automatically ends unless they positively affirm it, right? So it put a definite check. Not as good as I would like, not as good as there could be, but they definitely checked him. Sununu is in a tricky position. The governor of Massachusetts recently has come out. Oh, I was going to say had. So yeah, vaccine passports, that's a dead letter. That obviously I don't see that ever happening in New Hampshire. That's very much an over my dead body issue. And the thing is, there's many people here who feel the same way and who are organized politically to stop it. So I would never want to discount the risk of tyranny because that's always a risk, but I think it's going to be not that easy. We have a high crypto merchant adoption, but I wish it was more Bitcoin centric. I'm trying to get more Bitcoiners, not crypto in general, to move here. Thank you. Nice to see you, Marie. I know who you are. You like my mane? It's getting a little out of control. So, yeah, I think that there's more and more buzz. Like I said, I've had friends who've known about it for years who are begging their wives, just doing whatever they can. I had one guy tell me he will, any company that will sponsor him, he will sacrifice all of his wages to pay for any of the fees associated with the immigrant. Like they're that eager to get here. One of my friends said that his business, he's done the calculations, he's got the numbers because he runs advertisements here, that he would basically triple or quadruple his income the very first year, and that the home that he could buy with the money he spent on his last home would be 4 or 5 times bigger than the house he currently. It's just way better than a lot of places, and a lot of people are getting out of Dodge. And if they ever did this or got close to doing this, a lot of the worst elements of the state would just leave. They'd just move to Mass. I mean, that's the thing. That's the wonderful thing too. Like, if you don't like it, fucking move to Mass. Like, if you want a vaccine passport, if you want high taxes, if you want regulations on guns, if you want all that stuff, you can go to Vermont and you can go to Mass. That's perfectly easy. You don't even have to move that far. It's a stone's throw away for some people. So, to what degree are they going to be? I mean, maybe there's issues with their Easy Pass or something, but I don't think that's going to be a big problem. They're culturally distinct, but economically integrated, and I think that economic integration is probably going to stay, and it's going to be in the best interest of everybody. If anything, we've kind of got Maine held hostage. So, I don't know. It would be very interesting to see what would happen in Maine, because they would suddenly become an exclave, and what's the state that they have the most in common with? It's definitely New Hampshire, right? I mean, you could say Oregon because it's settled by Mainers and they both got a Portland, but it's really New Hampshire, right? They're the most similar. That doesn't mean that they would join. I wouldn't want to build an empire. I'm talking like I personally run the place, but like if we're talking generally ideologically, like I wouldn't necessarily think a union with Maine would be good, but Maine could leave and just form its own republic, and that would be even better. The Navy would really be fucked then, though, because then they wouldn't have a base there. So, yeah, this is really good news. Again, I don't think this is not going to pass, but people are going to have to vote on it. There's going to be a debate. There's going to be more talk about it, and that's just going to bring more people in. And there's really nothing they can do to stop. It would be interesting if the COVID people started to say, well, let's try and stop the Free Staters from moving in with some kind of immigration restrictions in the state. So let's see. I also posted a link a little earlier, 80 reasons why New Hampshire should divorce DC. Seems like a very calculated way to not say secede. Yeah. Basically, these are all the reasons the federal government is bad. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. They're getting real picky on the taxes and income and all that kind of stuff. All the more reason to leave. We could lease the Navy base to the U.S. like Guantanamo. Oh, that's a great idea. I would feel bad, though, about taking tax money. We don't want to put ourselves in, like, we're dependent on them. I think that they should just go. Or maybe we could sell them one of those tiny islands, one of those, like, 1 acre islands that have a lighthouse on them, and they could keep that. Yeah, they probably would end up putting some kind of tax on the 95 corridor and charging people an arm and a leg to go to Maine. or from. Maine would probably have to leave, basically, and then it would open up all kinds of possibilities vis-a-vis Canada. Also, that's another thing because there is a border. It's pretty rural, but I've gone up there once to see what it's like, and it's basically like a police state because there's this Orwellian razor wire post September 11th, situation up there. If New Hampshire were to leave and they were to loosen those border controls, we would be seeing a lot more commerce with Canada, with Quebec, and that would be to the good. What about other states? Well, I'm not. Look, I mean, fuck the United States. They should all leave. Other states that definitely have great reasons to leave and could. I mean, Texas obviously is one. Hawaii probably could. It would be tricky for Alaska, but they could do it. Obviously, I mean, we can all hate California, but they could definitely leave. California could definitely leave. New York would be tricky. New York would have the money, but they are so dependent on their surrounding areas, and that would cut off all of New England from the rest of the country. So that would create a gigantic, heavily populated enclave. In fact, I'm sure that would be like the largest enclave in the world, even if New Hampshire and Maine weren't part of it. Just the Vermont, Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island part would be gigantic. Florida could leave. The only ones that would be real problem would be the landlocked ones in the interior. So I'm sorry for Wyoming. I'm sorry for Utah and Colorado, Nebraska. These states would all have a lot of trouble. Restoration of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Yeah, Hawaii could definitely do it, and there's people there who kind of envision it becoming the Singapore of the Pacific, right? This hub right in the center, and I don't know how realistic that is, but but right now Hawaii is like super left wing, but there aren't any states where it's impossible. Like the poorest states could do this because there's nothing about the federal government that makes you richer on net. It's a loss to everyone. New York City leaving would be better than New York State leaving. So yeah, there's I just read a book called American Nations, and they talk about the various ones, and some of them are huge and extensive. So Yankeedom is a huge and extensive cultural region in the United States. Its heart is in Boston, but it's spread to include all of New England and a big part of like the Central Great Lakes and the Midlands, but and then the Deep South, Appalachia, and there's two that have been like cut off and truncated and have shrunk a lot. And one of them is Tidewater, so the Chesapeake area of Virginia and Maryland, and a little bit of North Carolina, and that has really been cut off by Appalachia and the Deep South. But the other one is New Netherland. And New Netherland used to be quite a bit bigger and go all the way up the Hudson Valley and then up the Mohawk Valley and include this basically upstate New York. And it has shrunk to basically New York City. But it's the smallest, but it's like the most important culturally economic, city in the world, or certainly in the continent. And maybe it should just be its own city-state, I go back and forth between New Hampshire and California. I actually tried to get a Calexit movement. All it would take is another Trump, and they'll leave. I just read that they've had a ballot initiative for years of left wingers who want California to leave. Right, the people who, hey, the reason we don't have Medicare for all, and the reason we don't have universal basic income, and whatever it is that they love, the reason we don't have those things is because we're tied to all these red states that we hate. So let's leave. Okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. California can leave, and we can go visit there if we want. The other tricky part, because the easy part is if it's an entire state because it's already established. The tricky part is when you have states that divide, and that is going to be a problem in a couple places. So like Washington and Oregon are both bitterly divided. They're the east part of those states are the interior west. They're very libertarian and very red. The west coast is the left coast. And those states are just completely culturally different. And there's a couple states where that runs through. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, all have the southern part is like Appalachian. They're like Southerners. They're what's the term? Butternuts. And the Northerners are Yankees, and they hate each other's. So and then like the middle will be the Midlands, which is like the Quakers who say let's not bother everyone. So. But yeah, Texas Republic, definitely. You know, I always had a soft spot for Wyoming. I think it's a great state, but it is completely isolated. So, you know, they would have to, if several, man, if they could get somehow, several of the interior states could, and if they could get some kind of corridor to, say, I mean, I'd say Portland, but who would want Portland? You know, Portland or Seattle, or maybe a northern port in California, but it's a hard sell. Yeah, rural California. So yeah, that's true. Like in the Sierra Nevadas and in the farming areas. So yeah. All right, guys. So big news on that. Hopefully there'll be more news on that when they have the votes. Before we finish up there, any questions? Anything? Definitely go check out the Odysee page. I'll put a link in the description too if you see this later. Did I answer the question? You said I want to move to New Hampshire. That's not a question. Oh, what about other states? I answered that. Come on. Pay attention. Yep. So check out the Odysee page. You know, there's traffic on there, but it's still kind of new, so it's not as much as, you know, the YouTube gets at this point. But it's definitely refreshing. Look, people can post videos about anything, so you can go on a rabbit hole like you used to be able to do on YouTube. So check out that debate, 3-hour debate, interesting discussion with a guy whose name is literally slavery advocate. So totally. I am not getting vaccinated. Well, just type your question again if I missed it. Going back. I answered all the questions that I can see. If you want me to answer one, just ask it again. Yeah, didn't the Prince of Liechtenstein write that book, The State in the Third Millennium, basically saying there should be tiny states? Why not? Because I don't think COVID is that dangerous for me. And there's evidence that having natural immunity is better than a vaccine. And I'm suspicious of the vaccine. And it's my body, my choice. And it was rushed. And I'm not going to trust the people who are almost as likely to have created the disease in the first place, right? It was Fauci who was doing gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab, paying for it to be done, advocating that it should be done. Maybe he's the one who made it by accident. I'm not saying it was cynical, but he fucked it up somehow. And we've been lied to constantly about it. Oh, you only need one shot. Now you need two. Now you need boosters. It will protect you completely. You'll never get sick. Oh, no. You'll never get infected. Oh, you will get infected, but you won't get sick. Oh, you will get sick. Blah, blah, blah. On and on and on and on and on and on. Sorry, no. I'm not convinced, and I shouldn't have to be. That's why. And I'm not alone. I'm not alone. And I had to put up for shit for that, not from work, but from family. Family pushed me hard on that. I'm like, nope, not doing it. I'll take my chances. They're pretty good. So it's not even like that statement is not a sign of bravado, because it's not that risky for, you know, my demographic. The people who want it can get it, and I'm not going to feel guilty. I never felt guilty. Look, we all spread diseases. We always have for our entire lives pre-COVID. And many of those diseases killed people. So, look, you're not guilty because a pathogen spreads from you to other people, especially if you don't know you have it. Now, if you're intentionally doing it, that's different. But if you're not intentionally doing it, then it's not your fault. So, and again, all right, my pleasure. All right, guys. Well, if that's all for tonight, I want to thank you all for watching. Please go and check out the Odysee. Let me post that one more time. Just check out the video. Check out the channel. Odysee's way, way, way better. Just because it's free and not run by the YouTube communists. There you go. People pay way too much attention to the fact that the lab was in China and not nearly enough attention to the fact that the U.S. paid for it. Yeah, there would be... I don't see a retyped question, HAPA perspective. I do not see anything. It's not showing up. You must be saying something that's not allowed by YouTube because it's not showing up. Does anyone else see his question? I just see you saying over and over again, you missed my question. I asked a question, you missed my question. I don't see anything. Sorry. It's not showing up. You must be asking something that's illegal on YouTube, in which case you should go on Odysee. What was I going to say? Yeah, if that's true that the U.S. funded it and the Chinese accidentally let it go, then they should both be guilty. The guy who paid for it and who said that it should be done, he has responsibility, and the lab that fucked it up, they have responsibility. They're both responsible, right? It's a Chernobyl situation. They're both responsible. And the responsibility for something like that, if it's not death by the most horrible means possible, then so be it. Yeah, HAPA perspective, this is why you should go to Odysee, because this won't be a problem. But please don't blame me because you're asking a verbatim question. Seriously considering moving to New Hampshire, where should I look for advice? Go on to Facebook or go on to some of the websites that say Free State, Free Staters, freestate.org, whatever, and look, just new movers. There's new, like Free State new movers. Look that up. There's all kinds of people who, I mean, when I wanted to move, it took me 1 hour to find a place. 1 hour. Okay, well, you're not allowed to say shitlib, apparently. Oh, no, did I say that out loud? Is this whole stream going to get taken down? I'd say it's get demonetized, but it's not monetized anyway, so not even possible. So, yeah, that's what you should do. You should go look up, I looked up, I think it was like the Mover's Guide or whatever. I found a guy who, a free stater who had a property he was trying to rent, showed me pictures of the room, told me how much it was. Boom, agreed, drove over, had it there, still live in the same place. Not the same room, but the same house. 7.5 years later. There's tons of free staters who are into real estate, who are getting more and more and more every year, growing, basically becoming landlords all throughout the state, all over the state, all over the sides. You know, I've got a friend who's got 8 properties in Keene, right? And growing every day. It's a big question, Hoppa. There are definitely all cultural divides and there are national divides. But I question how willing the sides are to really go to war. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying violence could never happen. But do you think the liberal people are willing to volunteer by the millions to be killed by the hundreds of thousands? The other thing, too, is we've got nukes. If this was a big divide, both sides would end up with nukes. In which case, they just have to be nice. So I don't want to say it's impossible, but I actually don't think it's particularly likely. Right? The military gets upset when it gets deployed to Afghanistan. They're going to be way more upset if they get deployed to, New Hampshire, for instance. So it's a horrible thing to think about, and maybe it's good to prepare and to ready yourself mentally for that possibility. But it's also not something I think you should assume or expect, and certainly not something that you should seek. You don't want to seek that happening. So, all right, guys. Well, I want to thank everybody who tuned in and listened. Everyone, please go and check out the Odysee channel. Just because there's content there that's not here and it's never going to be here. There's stuff on that channel that I'll never upload on this. So